Welcome back to Feminism, Theory and Practice. I am Rahul Kundu and this is lecture number 9. Over the past 8 lectures, we have traced feminism from suffragettes to queer theory, from liberal feminism to post colonial critique. We have built a toolkit of concepts: patriarchy, intersectionality, the personal is political, compulsory heterosexuality, gender performativity. Today, we ask what happens to feminism in the age of the internet. Think about how much everything has changed. In 2006, Tarana Burke coined the phrase Me Too for a grassroots campaign supporting sexual assault survivors in black communities. It reached a few thousand people. 11 years later, in October 2017, actress Elisa Milano tweeted the hashtag, and within 24 hours, hashtag MeToo had been used 12 million times. Within a year, it had spread to 85 countries. Has the internet fundamentally transformed feminist politics? Or is it the same struggle in a new medium? Are hashtags revolutionary tools for consciousness raising? Or do they create a shallow collectivism that substitute for real organizing? These are the questions we will explore today. We will examine the debates around a fourth wave of feminism, trace the rise and critique of hashtag MeToo globally and in India, and look at contemporary movements from Pinjra Tod to farmers' protest. Let's begin with a fundamental question: is there actually a fourth wave? The language of waves has organized how we think about feminist history. First wave, suffrage; second wave, liberation; third wave, intersectionality and individual agency. But is there a fourth wave? And if so, what defines it? The term fourth wave feminism began appearing around 2008 to 2012, associated with the rise of feminist blogging, online activism, social media organizing. But not everyone agrees it exists as a distinct phenomenon. Proponents argue that digital technology has fundamentally transformed feminist practices in a ways that constitute a new wave. First, there's a question of scale and speed. The internet enables feminist messages to reach millions instantly, bypassing traditional gatekeepers. What took decades in earlier waves, building consciousness, creating solidarity, demanding change, can now happen in days or weeks. Second, there's what scholars call hashtag feminism or networked feminism. Campaigns like hashtag yes all women, hashtag everyday sexism, hashtag times up, and hashtag me too have created new forms of collective testimony. Individual stories accumulate into an undeniable pattern of systematic harm. Third, fourth wave feminism is characterized by an explicit commitment to intersectionality, building on third wave insight by but applying them more systematically to online organizing. The emphasis on centric marginalized voices, calling out white feminism and building coalitions across difference marks a methodological shift. Criticals and critiques raise several objections to the fourth wave framework. Some argue that waves are a Western construct that centers white middle class feminism while erasing the continuous activism of women of color, working class women, and women in global south, who never stopped organizing between the waves. And as Kimberly Crenshaw says, the wave model tends to centralize white women's experience. For many feminists of color, there have been no breaks, no moments of compulsancy. Others argue that online activism is qualitatively different from, but not necessarily superior to, earlier forms. Hashtags can raise awareness but may not build the sustained organizational infrastructure needed for lasting change. Still, others question whether we have enough historical distance to identify a new wave. Perhaps we are simply seeing the continuation of third wave themes in a new technological context. Rather than definitively settling the wave debate, let's identify what's genuinely distinctive about contemporary digital feminism. First, democratization of voice. Before digital media, getting heard required access to publishers, broadcasters, or academic institutions. Now, anyone with internet access can share their story. There has been particularly powerful for the survivors of sexual violence who historically faced skepticism and silencing. Second, the calling out culture debate. Digital feminism has popularized calling out. Public criticism of sexist behavior, often naming individuals. This has proven effective in holding powerful men accountable, but it has also generated controversy. Does call out culture create space for accountability or for pile-ups? Does it distinguish between mistake and patterns of harm? Can it become a tool for horizontal hostility within feminist communities? Third, intersection with other movements. Digital feminist organizing has been deeply intertwined with Black Lives Matter, climate justice, disability justice, and trans rights movements. The logic of intersectionality has shaped how these movements understand themselves as interconnected struggles. Fourth, global circulation. Feminist hashtags cross borders with unprecedented speed, but they don't translate automatically. Hashtag MeToo meant something different in United States, France, India, and China. Local activists have adapted global frameworks to specific contexts, sometimes successfully, sometimes in ways that reproduce Western dominance. The Me Too movement has two origin stories, and both matter. In 2006, Tarana Burke, a black woman activist from Bronx, created Me Too as part of her work with Just Be Inc., a non-profit supporting girls of color who had experienced sexual abuse, assault, or exploitation. Burke had experienced sexual violence herself and understood the power of survivors reorganizing each other. Burke's work reached thousands of young women over a decade. It was local, intensive, focused on healing community building rather than naming perpetrators. Second, Elisa Milano. On October 15, 2017, days after the New York Times published allegations against the Harvey Weinstein, actress Elisa Milano tweeted, "If you have been sexually harassed or assaulted, write me too" as a reply to this tweet. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within 24 hours, there was 12 million posts using the hashtag. Within months, high profile men in entertainment, politics, media, and other industries faced public accusations. Some lost their jobs, some faced legal consequences, some merely experienced embarrassment before resuming their careers. The viral hashtag MeToo movement achieved several things that earlier feminist organizing had struggled to accomplish. First, it created collective testimony at scale. Individual stories had always been dismissible. Isolated incidents, he said, she said, bitter ex employees. But when hundreds of women told similar stories about the same man, or thousands told similar stories about workplace harassment in general, the pattern becomes undeniable. Second, it shifted the burden of proof, at least temporarily. For a movement, survivors were believed. The default assumption that women lie about sexual violence was challenged by sheer volume of testimony. Third, it created material consequences. Harvey Weinstein is in prison. Charlie Rose, Lawyer, and other lost their careers. Companies implemented new policies. The conversation about workplace harassment entered mainstream discourse. Fourth, it inspired legislative action. France passed a law against street harassment. Sweden introduced explicitly consent laws. Various US states extended statutes of limitations for sexual assault cases. From the beginning, critiques, including many feminists, raised important concern. The women whose story broke through were disproportionately white, wealthy, and famous. Tarana Burke herself noted that #MeToo had been co opted from its origins in communities of color. Working class women, women of color, women in informal employment who face higher rate of sexual harassment had less access to rival platforms and less protection when they spoke out. Some argued that social media trials bypassed due process. Accusations could destroy careers without investigation. The movement didn't always distinguish between criminal assault and awkward dates, serial predators, and one time mistakes. Journalist Sarah Jaffe and other pointed out that #MeToo focused on individual bad actors rather than structural conditions. Low wage workers, domestic workers, and agricultural workers face endemic harassment but lack the platform or protection to participate in activism. When #MeToo went global, it encountered different legal system, cultural context, and power dynamics. In France, prominent women signed a letter defending men in right to importune women. In China, feminist activists used #MeToo before the hashtag was censored. In each context, the movement took on local meanings and conflicts. And in India also, Me Too movement was widespread at that moment. India's Me Too movement arrived in October 2018, almost a year after the American wave. It was catalyzed by actress Tanushri Datta's decision to revisit a 2008 incident involving actor Nana Patekar, and it quickly expanded actors across industries. Over the following weeks, accusations emerged against prominent figures in film, media, comedy, publishing, and politics. MJ Akbar, then a sitting minister, was accused by multiple women journalists, comedian Utsav Chakraborty, editor Chetan Bhagat, filmmaker Vikas Bahal, and many others faced public allegations. The Indian context shaped #MeToo in specific ways. First, there was a pre existing legal framework. India had strengthened its sexual harassment laws after the 2013 Criminal Law Amendment, passed in response to Nirbhaya case and the Vishaka Guidelines 1997, which required workplace harassment committees. The question wasn't whether harassment was illegal, but why the law wasn't being enforced. Second, Indian feminism has a longer history with digital organizing. The 2012 Delhi gang rape case had already demonstrated the power of social media in mobilizing public outrage and demanding justice. Activists had built networks and developed tactics. Third, India's specific social hierarchies, caste, class, religion, intersected with gender in ways that shaped who could speak and who would be believed. Critiques quickly pointed out that India's Me Too was heavily skewed towards English speaking upper caste urban professionals. Kiruba Munusamy said Dalit women face sexual violence at work every day, from domestic labor to agricultural fields. But their stories don't trend on Twitter. The women who led the movement and those whose stories gained traction were largely from privileged backgrounds. Journalists at elite publication, actresses in mainstream cinema, academics at premier institutions. This wasn't because less privileged women don't experience harassment. They experience at higher rates, but because they lack access to platforms where their stories would be amplified. Consider domestic work, which employs millions of Indian women, mostly Dalit and Adivasi. Sexual harassment by employers is endemic, but domestic workers are excluded from most labor laws. have no HR departments to complain to, and depend on individual employers for their livelihoods. Their stories didn't become hashtags. Dalit feminist scholars like Raya Sarkar had actually initiated an early effort. The list of sexual harasser in academia in October 2017, which crowdsourced names of accused professors. This list was met with horror by mainstream feminists who signed a statement denouncing it as vigilantism. The contrast with the celebration of upper caste #MeToo accusations a year later was stark. And an anonymous Dalit feminist academic said, when Dalit women name their harassers, it's called vigilantism. When upper caste women do it, it's called Me Too. How did institutions respond to #MeTooIndia? Some organizations took action. The Times of India terminated MJ Akbar's column. Phantom Films was dissolved. Some universities and companies conducted investigations, but the overall record was mixed. MJ Akbar initially remained in the cabinet, but resigning only after weeks of pressure. And then he filed criminal defamation cases against his accusers. Alok Nath was a cast in a film called Main Bhi, even after facing accusations. And the irony was that the Hindi name of Main Bhi means me too. The message was clear. Accusation might create temporary embarrassment, but rarely ended careers permanently. Many accused men filed defamation suits against their accusers. India's criminal defamation law, unlike in many other countries, allows imprisonment. This created a chilling effect. Speaking out could mean years of legal battle, financial ruin, and even jail. Priya Ramani, who had accused MJ Akbar, won her defamation case in February 2021, but only after years of litigation. The judgment was celebrated as a vindication, but few women could afford to fight such cases. So, the lessons for digital feminism in India illustrate both power and limitations of #victims. It demonstrated that digital tools can create solidarity and break silences. Women who had felt alone discovered they were part of a pattern. The accumulation of testimony made structural harassment visible, but it also showed that viral movements don't automatically translate into institutional change. Without sustained organizing, legal reforms, and attention to intersectionality, the energy dissipates. The most vulnerable women, those most in need of solidarity, may be the least able to participate in digital movements. Let's turn to several contemporary movements that illustrate how Indian feminism operates today. Movements that combine digital organizing with street presence and that explicitly engage with intersectionality. Pijra Toad meant Break the Cage in Hindi. Founded in 2015 by students and alumni of Delhi University and GNU. It challenges discriminatory hostel rules that restrict women's mobility, curfews, dress codes, restrictions on leaving campus. The movement's genius was connecting individual grievances to structural analysis. Why do women's hostel have 8 p.m. curfews when men hostel don't? The stated reason, safety, actually restricts women's freedom while doing nothing to address male violence. It's paternalistic protection that reinforces gender hierarchy. Pinjra Toad used social media effectively at documenting arbitrary rules, sharing student stories, organizing petitions, but also engaged in direct action. Sit-ins, protests, and negotiations with administrators. The movement won concrete victories also. Several universities relaxed curfews, and the issue entered public debate. Importantly, Pinjdatod connected hostel rules to caste and class. Hostel restrictions disproportionately affect students from rural backgrounds and lower caste who depend on university housing and cannot afford off-campus alternatives that richer students use to circumvent rules. The 2020-21 farmers' protest against three agricultural laws became one of the largest sustained protest movements in human history. Less noted was women's significant participation. Women farmers, who constitute a significant portion of agricultural labor, joined the protest at Delhi's borders. They cooked in community kitchens, staffed medical camps, and participated in demonstrations. On January 18th, 2021, Mahila Kisan Divas, Women's Farmers Day, saw thousands of women take center stage at protest sites. Yet, women's role in the movement also revealed tensions. Despite their participation, leadership remained largely male dominated. Women's specific concerns, land rights, unpaid labor, domestic violence weren't always centered in the movement's demand. To understand how far digital feminism has come in India, consider the Pink Chaddi campaign of 2009, often called India's first feminist social media campaign. When members of Sri Ram Sena attacked women in Mangalore pub, a group called Consortium of Pub Going Loose and Forward Women organized a response. Male pink chaddis to the attackers on Valentine's Day. The campaign was playful, irreverent, and viral before viral was common vocabulary. It used humor to deflate moral policing and demonstrated that Indian women would not be ashamed into silence. Looking back, the Pink Chaddi campaign seems almost quaint, a simpler time when a single clever idea could break through. Today's digital feminism is more complex, more contested, more entangled with platform capitalism and surveillance states. But the spirit of creative resistance continues. So, what links these diverse movements? First, they all combine digital organizing with physical presence. Hashtags create awareness, bodies in street create pressure. Neither is sufficient alone. Second, they engage intersectionality explicitly. Pinjra Tod connects gender to caste. The farmers' movement connects gender to class. This reflects the maturation of Indian feminist analysis. Third, they face common challenges: state repression, media hostility, internal tensions over leadership and priorities. Digital visibility can invite crackdowns as easily as solidarity. So, as we close, let me offer four key takeaways from today's lecture. First, digital technology has transformed feminist organizing, enabling new scales of solidarity, new forms of testimony, new possibilities for global connection, but it hasn't replaced the need for sustained on the ground work. Second, the fourth wave debate matters less than understanding what's genuinely new. Democratized voices call out culture, intersectional consciousness, and global circulation with local translation. Third, hashtag MeToo demonstrated both the power and limits of viral feminism. It broke silences and created consequences, but it also revealed whose voices gets amplified and whose remains unheard. The women most vulnerable to harassment are often least able to participate in hashtag activism. Fourth, contemporary Indian movements from Pinjra Tod to farmer protest show feminism alive in the streets, engaging with caste class citizenship, combining digital savvy with physical courage. In our next and final lecture, we'll bring everything together. We'll ask, where has feminism succeeded? Where it has fallen short? What does the future hold? We'll explore emerging frontiers like ecofeminism and climate justice, disability justice, AI and algorithmic bias, transnational solidarity, and we'll ask what it means to practice feminism today. Not just as an academic framework, but as a way of engaging with the world. We have traveled far in this series, from suffragettes to queer theory, from Wollstonecraft to Butler, from colonial resistance to digital activism. The final lecture asks, what do we do with this knowledge? Thank you for watching. If you found this helpful, please like, subscribe, and share. Leave your questions and thoughts in the comments. I read everyone. Until next time, keep questioning, keep organizing, and keep imagining a more just world. Thank you.